So I'm going to start by saying Kaya. Kaya, welcome. I want to acknowledge the beautiful place that we're meeting on, the incredible spiritual significance of this place. And I'll start with a few stories about my place and where I come from. I come from Geraldton, which is about a 5-hour drive north. Has anyone been to Geraldton? Yeah, cool. Now, I grew up in Geraldton, and each January I would go home and spend time with my cousins and extended family in a beautiful place called Horrocks Beach. A lot of my family were farmers and cray fishermen, and this is where we had our January holiday together by the beach. And my family have done that for about 4 generations. So visiting there is quite a special place. They're tiny little huts, and you spend the whole day, just by the beach, building castles and things like that. And just arriving in Geraldton and then travelling to Northampton and then into Horrocks, I had a sense of what it feels like to be connected to a place. And so when I visit this place and see the beautiful river that sits behind us, I acknowledge the continuous connection traditional people have had to this land and the significance it has for them. And when I visit Geraldton, my dad is super cool. He drives a ute, and as he drives along, he just raises a finger when he sees someone he knows. And if it's a really good mate, it'll be a really big raise of the finger. If it's just a hi, it's just and sometimes it's just a nod. And as part of opening today's presentation, I invite you to connect with someone else in the room. Just acknowledge, think of showing up today, and you can just raise a finger, nod, smile at someone, and let's see what this does to our brain. There you go. I see some people smiling, which is really nice. Yeah. So connection is why we are here. Connection gives meaning and purpose to our lives. And that simple note of just connecting, acknowledging other people in the room, starts to fill the brain with all those fabulous chemicals. So we've got dopamine starting to kind of fire. Most of today's presentation will be pictures, and a big shout out to the sponsors. Thank you so much for this beautiful venue and making this event happen. And this is my welcome, and I'm so glad you're here. So sitting in this room will probably be, a varied group. If you want to get up, and if you want to get a glass of water, if you want to move around, I just want to acknowledge that some people here will be neurodiverse, and as Whitwell would say, please experience this content as you would like to experience it. And if that means you want to stand up, if that means you want to stretch, if that means you want to go out and get a glass of water and come back, you're most welcome to do that. So, who am I? I am V. I live around this area. I like to skate, and this is me skating the Madagarra Bridge. I live in my mind. In fact, I probably live 30 centimetres above my mind. I'm an introvert, and I love my own thoughts. I work in cybersecurity, so I love to solve things. And because I spend a lot of time in my mind, and I read a lot, and I study a lot, I choose to do things outside my job that take me back to my body. Because this connection between mind, brain, and body is a really important connection to maintain. So I swim early in the morning at 7 a.m, and I also choose to connect to nature, which connects me back to my body. And I'm a huge fan of Lego Serious Play. I think it's my proudest certification amongst a whole bunch of other certifications for cyber. So let's roll. So 3 things today we're going to cover. I want to talk a little bit about brain function, the parts of the brain, what our stress response is actually, and what happens in the brain and how that informs the body. I want to talk a bit about the connection of cybersecurity and neuroscience, and why would I choose to talk about this right now, this time in history. And third, I want to cover off some really simple activities that we can do to connect the mind and the body and to actually help us to do really good, important work at this time. So I work in security operations, and I had been doing that work for about 2 or 3 years. And it occurred to me that a number of the people in the team were quite stressed. A number of people started complaining of migraines, of sleep-related issues, skin-related issues. Someone said to me, "Hey, V, I think I'm really experiencing some pain in my heart." And they went straight from an incident response to the emergency response centre of a hospital. We had another member of the team who said, "Oh, you know, my shoulder's feeling really crook. I actually don't feel like eating today." He went to get some tests. He was diagnosed with cancer of the liver and the spleen. From the date of diagnosis to the day he died was 4 months. And then another person said to me, they said, "You know, working in this space feels like waking up every day and getting punched in the face." So there's this kind of environment that's highly stressful, and it's starting to affect the experience of work for many people working in security operations. So I started to look at what can we do to actually make the work easier. How do we design the work? How do we put pauses in the work? And what do we do to change the way we design work so that we can better protect our people? This is a survey that was done by Securo in 2022. And what it said was that 9 out of 10 people working in cybersecurity reported experiencing mental health-related challenges at work. And 50% of those people said it was as a result of the work that they were doing, and about the other half said it was attributed to some of the struggles and the culture and the management style. So as a manager, I take real ownership of that 51%. What can I do to change the way we do work to help people, to sustain people in the work? And the other thing that occurs to me right now is that the nature of work is changing. We have just lived through this incredible period of COVID and post-COVID. We're on the dawn of this AI era. AI's been around a very long time, but it's now, available to all of us, and we're all starting to use it. If we gain back some time, how do we design that time to best innovate, problem solve, and be creative? And what sorts of things should we be designing into our work in order for that space to happen? So some people think of the brain as being either left brain or right brain. I like to think of the brain in terms of 3 functional areas. We've got the brain stem, which is in charge of our survival brain. That's the oldest part of the brain. Then we've got the limbic system, which is our feeling centre. It includes the amygdala, the hippocampus. And then we've got the neocortex. That's our thinking brain. That's where our decision-making comes from. It's the higher order brain. If you bring up your fist and put your thumb in the centre of your hand and then wrap your fingers over, you've got a model of the brain. Coming up here is the brain stem. Coming into the brain stem, we've got the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. And then wrapping around it is the neocortex. Now, what happens in a stress-related situation is all of those emotions, and that the primary emotions that come from the oldest part of our brain are things like breathing, anger, aggression, emotion, rises up through the brainstem into the limbic area, and then when our resources exceed the capacity, we actually flip the lid. Anyone seen anyone flip the lid? Anyone seen a child tantrum? Anyone seen a teenager tantrum? Anyone seen a tantrum at work? Yeah, it happens a lot. And so I think if we understand actually what's going on in the brain, and we're actually able to say to people, actually, I think I'm about to flip my lid, we can say, hey, take a pause, grab a walk, grab some cold water, let's calm things down a bit and bring the irrational part of the brain, the neocortex, back online. So I've got these beautiful images. These images come from the Queensland Brain Institute. We used to think most brains were kind of similar, but now we've come to understand that there's a lot of variation in the shape and the size and the structure of brains. And so scanning these images has led us to discover more about the brain. One thing we know, we used to think that a larger brain equated to greater intelligence, but now we know it's actually the structure of the brain that actually relates to people's intelligence. And we know the different structure of a brain might mean that someone is musical, someone is more sporty, someone's better at geospatial recognition, and all of these sorts of things. So we come to understand there's a lot of variation in the structure of the brain. And when we think about the whole nervous system, we think about the brain, we think about the spinal cord, we think about that nervous system then connecting to every organ in the body. So when someone is struggling and experiencing cancer of the liver and the spleen, that stress starts in the brain, transfers through the brain, down the spinal cord to the organs. Stress sits in the body. So our awareness of how our mind is affecting our body is really important, and our awareness of how the body can actually affect the brain is equally important. Now, there's a great podcast I listen to by Andrew Huberman. He's got a great podcast, and he has suggested this idea of the psychological sigh. And what it is, it's 2 inhales and then a long exhale. Now, the very doing that exercise actually oxygenates the lungs and the brain, and what it will do, it will bring that neocortex back online so that we can actually do some of our best thinking. I really love this slide. It's called Blooming Axons, from the same research done at the Queensland Brain Institute. And what this shows us is kind of the electricity that's kind of running through the brain. So many of you will understand that the brain's made of neurons. Neurons communicate to each other through a kind of language called synapses. And when a synapse happens, it's kind of an electrical charge that goes from one cell to another. So we are actually made up of electricity. And running through our body is this kind of electrical charge that continues to operate. And I think this picture really shows that kind of electrical charge in our body. The other thing that this picture tells me is the dynamic nature of the brain. One of the great revelations more recently is about the neuroplasticity of the brain, and the fact that we can now study, we can now learn new things like a language, we can learn to dance, we can learn poetry, and these things will actually cause new neural kind of pathways in our brain. And I think it gives us great hope. When I was a uni student, I was worried that if I drank so much, it would actually start affecting my brain cells. I was actually quite relieved to discover this piece called neuroplasticity much later in life. And as I've come to study more and more certifications, I can actually say that, yeah, I'm quite confident that many more neural connections have been formed as I've gone head on into cybersecurity. Now, this is a beautiful map of some of those neural connections in the brain, and it's as many as the stars in the Milky Way. And when I think of this particular slide, I think of the map of the Milky Way, and the millions of stars remind me of the billions of cells in the brain. And if you think of a tiny grain of sand, shows us there's billions of kind of cells all wrapped up in that one size of a brain cell, which is amazing. I love this image, and what this image shows is actually 2 neural connections actually coming together and actually supporting each other. And now I want to just take this and kind of think about what happens when the neural connections come together in a really stressful environment. So, some things we know about stress. Short-term stress is actually quite good. Short-term stress can actually help us prepare for a talk or a certification. Short-term stress gives us the motivation to achieve an outcome. Long-term, prolonged stress is actually not good for the body. And we actually see some of the side effects of that long-term stress present in our bodies with headaches, migraines, rashes, stiff backs, necks, all of those sorts of things. Now, there's 3 things that actually affect stress, and that is the duration of the stress, the outcome of the stress, and the kind of how much the stress is, the outcomes are kind of bounded. So if we want to loosen up and have some creativity, we have to actually unbundle some of those things. How many of you wake up in the morning and feel creative and have really creative ideas? Sleep is one of those things that starts to loosen up that duration and that outcome focus. And our mind starts drifting during sleep. And that's why we have dreams, and that's why we have those really creative ideas starting to occur. The other great thing I've discovered is the power of walking and what that does for our brain. I discovered this when my daughter was studying for her ATAR exams, and she was kind of in the grip of quite a bit of anxiety. And I said, well, let's go for a walk, because she wasn't very functional at home. And she grabbed her notes. And I said, okay, bring your notes. Let's take the notes for a walk. And we walked for about 2 hours around this beautiful area here. And each time she would say, Mum, come for a walk. I'll go through my notes with you. She did really well at her ATAR. She's now finishing her honours in speech pathology. And she said to me, Mum, when I wrote my ATAR exams, I could remember what I had written, and I could remember the place I was when I read those notes to you. And I thought, there's something there. There's something there about walking that actually does something to the brain. And I'm going to have a look at my notes here, because there's a couple of great quotes that I want to call out. So there's a neuroscientist called Shane O'Mara, and he believes that regular walking unpacks our cognitive powers like nothing else. And he says that we should actually be trading our shoes, our running shoes for the gym, for walking shoes, and taking more walks. And there's a very interesting study that they did where they actually started, tracking where creativity started to happen. And they picked up that it was actually happening when people were walking, when people were in the shower, and when people were actually on their way to work. That's where all the creative time was actually being spent. And there's a couple of other, this is it here, right? It says, so Aristotle used to deliver his lectures around Athens while he was walking. Such was the activity in his brain when he walked that he would actually deliver his lectures and people would actually follow him taking notes. And then there's a really great poem by T.S. Eliot, and he says, a journey on foot is a journey through states of mind. And when I read that, a journey on foot is a journey through states of mind. And I thought, that's exactly what happens to me when I go for a walk. My favourite thing to do on a Saturday is to grab a coffee and to walk. And I can feel all these ideas starting to percolate, and I just wish I could wire my brain directly into something to record what's going on, because my most creative, magnificent thoughts happen on that Saturday when I'm not on my way to work, when I am just in a relaxed mode. My brain comes up with really amazing things, which is really quite profound. So that's one of my big ideas, is that we should actually be doing more walking. And the other big idea is that our best ideas actually happen in the shower. Does this resonate for anyone? Yeah. I'm living at the moment with a singer-songwriter, and I can tell you that our water bill is increasing, as is the eureka moments in the shower. And just like someone's written a maths formula on the shower door there, the lyrics and the creativity that happens in our shower, why? Because we suddenly get the mind relaxed. It's no longer attached to an outcome or a path or a duration. It relaxes enough for really amazing things to happen. I really credit this image to George from the Washington Post. I think it beautifully encapsulates some of the great things about why we need to, think about our day and plan our day so that we can actually have those brain breaks to do really great work. Okay. The other thing that's really important for the brain is sleep. And I like this image because what it shows me is what I know, and that is that a lot of cybersecurity people are not sleeping very much. you won't actually find them in bed because they're actually ruminating on things that they haven't solved. And I think that has a negative effect on the quality of some of the decision making, their attention span, and it can also lead to a susceptibility for mood disorders, which is really interesting. If you've ever talked to people in high-level cyber roles, I think sleep is something a lot of people wrestle with. So I want to run through a bit of a scenario. I've seen this scenario a few times. Generally, the scenario starts to unfold at 4 p.m. It could be a Thursday, it could be a Friday, it could be a Saturday, Sunday, but generally that 4 p.m. late in the afternoon, something will happen. A cyber incident unfolds, an application's impacted, data's exfiltrated, and the clock starts ticking. So research tells us that ransomware is a wicked problem. It's a wicked problem for crisis teams because a couple of things happen. There's no clear resolution. There's an incredible amount of data that someone needs to process, and the brain is actually overwhelmed. Hands up if you've had an experience of trauma or grief. If you've had an experience of trauma or grief, what happens to the brain at that time is it's got really limited cognitive capabilities. The processing really slows down because those good chemicals that actually help the brain are actually no longer firing. There's more cortisol and there's more kind of chemicals that are depressing the brain. So the example I most reference is the Colonial Pipeline incident that shut down the pipeline in the States in 2022. Now, within 4 hours of that incident happening, they paid the Bitcoin ransom of $4.4 million. And then after they'd paid the Bitcoin ransom, they then realised they had excellent backups. And they hadn't actually listened to the team, they hadn't consulted with the IT team to realise the quality of the backups were really good. They actually didn't use the decryption keys that they paid $4.4 billion. And in a congressional hearing, post-analysis of that incident, they realised that under stress, people had made that decision too quickly. They needed to pause, slow down, and consult a little bit wider. So this is kind of what happens, and this is a scenario, as I've mapped it, happening to a medium-sized enterprise. We have a major incident, we have a network rebuild. Sometimes we still have them in the network, and so we have further network-related issues. But if you look at all of the other activities that start to take place, the media gets involved, there's staff loss, there's the AFP or the Australian government coming in to help, there's assessments, there's board meetings, there's banks getting involved, there's announcements. In this case, this organisation went into liquidation within a very short time after the incident happened. So technical teams are focused on a number of things. They're looking at the critical business systems. They're looking to identify the threat actor. They want to know when the attack started. Is it still unfolding? How is it being confirmed? They want to know how the attacker gained access. Has there any sensitive or confidential information been stolen? And what are the known impacts of the breach? So that's happening at an operational layer. At a more strategic layer, you've got an extended leadership team focused on reporting, media, comms, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. They're worried about shareholder impact and financial risk. In a map, it kind of looks like this. And the brain's response to stress will be to actually treat this like it's a massive risk for the organisation. There'll be people worried about their jobs, there'll be people worried about damage, there'll be a bunch of kind of emotional things starting to run through the minds of the people. I really love David Rock's explanation of a threat model and how it applies to organisations. So David Rock says, first of all, that the brain is a social organ. So asking you to acknowledge each other with the Geraldton kind of wave actually starts to fill your brain with dopamine and oxytocin. Similarly, the brain's a social organism, so that when it experiences threat, the other chemicals like cortisol start to flood the brain. When cortisol kicks in, it has a really, really strong and long-lasting effect, and it actually reduces the brain's processing power. So it's like everything in the brain starts happening in slow motion. So when we've got a team in the reward response, we find that they can actually do the work independently, they're working cohesively as a team, there's a lot of initiative, there's a lot of kind of integrated thinking through the team. But when the team hit the red zone, we find that there's a threat response, degraded performance, there's a lot of fear in the team, and we actually find the team starts to fragment a little bit. And then if we run through each of those buttons, and they're quite interesting, the first button is the status button. So a cyber incident will affect the status of individuals in the organisation. The board will be most concerned. How does this reflect me? How does it affect the reputation of the organisation? So the board almost start drifting into that red zone. There'll be a lot of concern around certainty. How long does a cyber breach take to investigate? Nobody knows. In the initial 48 hours, no one can tell you whether this is going to take 2 weeks, 2 months, or whether we'll still be investigating this in 2 years' time. So that need for certainty will drag more people to the red zone. The need for autonomy will also be impacted, because in a cyber incident response, often there'll be forensic teams coming in, there'll be assistance from the Australian government, and other authorities will start to lean in to provide support. And then there'll be an impact on relatedness. You'll start to see a little bit of a rift between the operational team and the executive team. And there needs to be really strong communications between the two. And lastly, there may be issues of fairness, particularly if what's happened is actually a result of someone doing something or failing to do something in the flow of work. So what can we do about this? And I think there's a couple of different responses that actually happen. We have this initial response, which I've seen a number of times, which is confirming, yep, we've got a problem, and then panic. And then an overreaction and anger. And then this declaration of fix everything. Here's the budget, all the teams swarm, and we're actually going to give you a massive big budget to fix all cybersecurity problems. A more neuro-aware approach is actually to pause. And it's really hard to pause in a crisis. It's really hard to pause long enough to actually override that kind of ancient brain, to let the executive brain actually come online, to then delay it long enough to actually make those good quality decisions. And then there's the task of actually connecting the dots, the task of continuous communication internally and externally, because without that communication, people will make up the story. So there's a real continuous communication, and then there's a listening to prioritise. So I put this up because I think if this is the only takeaway, I think it's this idea of a pause and the idea of actually harnessing that breathing to actually come back to the body, to let the rational brain come back into gear. Because if we don't pause, system one takes over, and that system will solve the problem like we've always solved it. It might be a good response, it might be an emotional response, but we might be just playing out a scenario that's already been played out that may or may not relate well to the scenario we're dealing with. But if we pause long enough, system two comes online, and that allows us to think logically, to take time out, to consider the pros and cons, and then our brains, which don't really like doing that really hard, original kind of thinking, has the space to do it. So I really love this idea of focusing really hard and then tuning out. And they say if you can actually give your brain a 20-minute break, it sets you up for 2 hours of really great focus time. So this idea of focusing really hard and then expanding is really important for this kind of work. I was talking to a security analyst the other day, and they said, oh, V, something happened at work the other day. I saw a pattern in some of the logs, and I recognised something was happening. I watched it for a bit, and then the rest of work sort of took over. He said, it wasn't until I was walking to the train that it occurred to me what that might be. He said, I ran back to the office, got back online, and realised we actually had a fairly significant incident on our hands, called some people in, and then worked through the night. That's an example of stepping away, going from here to here, using that kind of walking thing that allows the brain to just think in a really, really flexible kind of way, and something different is seen in the pattern of what emerges. Okay, this is my other big idea, is that our brains love to relax near water. So after 2 minutes of viewing the outdoors today, grab yourself 2 minutes and look at the beautiful water behind us. It will lower your blood pressure. 2 minutes is all it needs to bring your blood pressure all the way down. And I call this horizon therapy, and I've been known in my family to do a little bit of horizon therapy, particularly in those that COVID time. And this is a particularly beautiful spot. It's a spot that I really love, and it's a spot that is between Floreat Beach and City Beach. And it says, looking out to where the sea meets the sky. So this is a particular special spot for Aboriginal people who I think understand the significance of actually looking out to the horizon to draw that kind of strength. And when you get out on the boardwalk, that's the view you get. Now, the person who arrives at the beach and then spends 20 minutes at the beach is different to the person who drives home. And often I will say to my family, when I dive in the ocean, kind of everything gets washed away. I actually go home quite a different person. I'm no longer angry, uptight, or impatient. And I think that's the effect of this thing called the blue mind. And marine biologist Wallace J. Nichols termed this concept the blue mind because he realised the phenomenon of what this blue space and the neuroscience connection of what it does to the body. We all know being close to nature, the green effect is equally important, and green spaces have been proven to lower cortisol levels and actually lower stress hormones and really lift our mood. And if anyone works in a place that's got green spaces, I think it's just a beautiful place to work. I studied for a little while at UWA, and I remember walking through the grounds and just feeling like that the impact of that environment on the thoughts was really beautiful. Okay, so this is my last kind of big idea about how do we manage stress. So if you're like that person who's no longer in their bed at night because thoughts are ruminating through your mind, this is my idea of actually writing them down, and write them down continuously. So write about the conflict, write about the resistance, write about the anxiety, and write about the procrastination. And after you've written about it, leave it in a book. Don't put it in the bin. Leave it in a book, because it actually tricks the mind, it hacks the mind. In the morning, you'll get up and you'll say, you know, all that stuff that was churning through my mind, it's in the book. It's dealt with. And today is a new day, and I'll leave all of that behind. Now, I call this the CRAP method, helps me remember what it is. When I put this into my AI coaching tool, it corrected me for saying that word that I shouldn't, but it actually helps me remember what it is. You're writing about the conflicts, the resistances, the anxiety and the procrastination. You're getting it out of your head and onto the page. I did this exercise continuously for 2 years. It changed how I felt about my body and made me much more functional during a very stressful time. Last big idea is about zebras. There's a fabulous book written about why zebras don't get ulcers. Anyone know why zebras don't get ulcers? Because they're zebras. They're not humans. The stress response in a zebra lasts 3 minutes. Then it's over. I would love to be a zebra. And if you're a zebra, you don't have these thoughts kind of circling all the time. They have this stress response, run, hide, pounce. It's over. Completely over. Instead, I think in our lives, something happens and we relive it. And our mind is kind of just keeps churning it. And so that the method on the previous slide helps when those kinds of thoughts keep reoccurring. Okay, and this is my last big idea. In the past, probably 5 years, we've placed a really high value on immediacy and execution. We've survived COVID, we're still here. But now, and during that time, we kind of wrung out a lot of the really deep thinking and creativity in our lives. And we left it for the actors, the poets, and the songwriters. But I think the tide is now turning, and it's time for us to reclaim creativity and problem solving and innovation back into our work. And I think we can do that through actually understanding more about brain science and what our brains need in order for us to have optimal kind of performance. I really love this slide. I took this slide, my husband took this slide, and my husband and my son just walked in a few moments ago. And it was taken about 10 years ago. We were in France, and we walked into this amazing museum, and my son, just with the awe of the moment, leapt up to look at the Paris skyline. And what this slide says to me is the importance of wisdom, awe, and joy in our lives. I think it's the thing that we want to have more of in our lives. And so if we can harness some of these crazy ideas that I've just talked about, the blue effect, the green effect, writing, horizon therapy, then we can, swimming in the morning, first thing, doing all these crazy things that I've suggested, we can actually understand how our brains, can calm them down, but we can also use our body to inform the brain for great things. Now, these are some of the resources I've used to prepare this talk. You'll see that fabulous book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Have a read of that. It's a really interesting read. This Andrew Huberman's Lab podcast is a really great thing to dial into. There's some great myths about the brain worth having a look at. The research from Securo is there as well. And also I've put the Australian Psychological Society because it's always nice to kind of recognise the great work that they do in this space. This is my contact. Love to connect with you. If you've got further questions, love to take them now. I think we've got about 5 minutes, so happy to take questions. It's a big room.
Okay, hi. You talked about cortisol, right? About how it affects our thinking ability and it relates to stress. Then what's the positive benefits of cortisol? Like, why is it there in the first place? It shouldn't only have negative consequences, right?
Yeah, I think cortisol comes from this reptilian brain, right? And it served a purpose when we were escaping dinosaurs and things like that. And it's part of that reptilian kind of blind brain. And it gives us that fight-flight response. Really important, right? But what happens also in our brain is that if we have too much cortisol, and we can't disconnect from the fact that we no longer need to run away, then the continual flooding of cortisol in the brain will actually degrade the performance. And that's what I see in cyber operations. I see many young people's brains flooded with cortisol. They are kind of in an experience like a first responder, like bushfire or fire or police or ambulance, but we're not training them we're not briefing them and debriefing them. We're not actually coaching them as to how to kind of de-escalate after a shift, how to get stuff. If they do a 12-hour shift, how do they kind of wind down enough to be able to go to sleep to then do peak performance tomorrow? So these are some of the complex questions people in the field of psychology are starting to look at within cybersecurity. How do we create an environment for people to do their best work and sustain the work long term? Because if we don't, we're seeing that pattern of burnout really rampant through the industry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, just behind you. Can we switch? Ooh. I think he's just running back to switch them over. Oh, there we go.
Should we bring this one over?
Hello?
Oh, great.
So my question is, you said that, we really need that 20 minutes to disconnect, and working in like a SOC, how do you go about getting that time and space? Do you have any tips for us when an incident happens, or maybe happens straight away? You've got exco, you've got legal, you've got insurance, you've got all these things to respond to.
Yeah.
So how do you go with dealing with that?
And that's why I think we need a whole new generation of leaders leading in that space, because it actually takes quite a lot of leadership to actually calm the executive down to say, this is what the team needs. I'm actually going to run this in a way that's going to keep the team in the green zone. And that might mean that you do periods of deep work and you actually suggest to people, let's tag on and off, and let's go for a walk, come back and get fresh eyes. Some security operations environments have people rotating, which I think is also really helpful, because they actually have time on the tools and then time to do continuous improvement and other things, and then they can come back to the work doing things differently. I came back to work after parental leave, and I worked 3 days a week. And I remember the 2 days that I was home watering the garden, washing dishes and pushing a pram was when all my great ideas happened that I took back Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So somehow we've got to structure work that we have time on task and time to look at the horizon. At the moment, we're doing far too much work, time on task, and not enough time, looking wider. And if there's one thing I'm hoping AI will give for cyber operations, is that 20% capacity to do more innovative problem-solving work, that we can kind of step back and look at things while the tools will handle more of the correlating and large data problems. Great. I think we're done. Thank you.